There's no button.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Van Alstein. I'm the principal here at Sequoia High School, and we just want to say welcome. And I'm pleased to be able to be part of this great event. I'd first like to start off by recognizing a few of our guests with us this evening, particularly Dr. Brian Hightower, our Superintendent of Schools, who we'll be hearing shortly. Executive Director of School Operations, Ms. Debbie Murdoch, is also with us tonight. I appreciate them joining us. I'd first like to start to talk about what we're here for. Mr. Eubanks approached me at the beginning of the school year with an idea that had come from probably many of you. And I thought what a great tribute that would be for a man who had such an influence on so many in Cherokee County, but across Georgia and across our entire country. So we started the process of getting to today. And if I could, I had an opportunity to speak with Susan and get to know David. I didn't know David, but I got to know him a little bit through our conversations, and I'd just like to share some things with all of you. Some of you may know these things, but I just thought it was important tonight to share some of these things. David Harrison began his teaching career in Banks County. He spent 2 years there and had tripled the size of the band in those 2 years. He then moved to Lumpkin County and spent 7 years there building their band, which was consistently earning superior ratings. But, fortunately for everyone here today, in 1986, David signed on to be the band director at Cherokee High School, and his influence on Cherokee County began. David remained at Cherokee High School until 1990, where his success only continued. Then that fall, he became the first band director for the Chiefs. David remained at SHS until he retired in 2010. His marching bands, concert bands, orchestras, symphonic bands were considered some of the best in the state and the country. They won countless awards throughout his time at SHS. But when he retired in 2010, he wasn't done. He took the opportunity to go work in the music department at Reinhardt University, where he continued to work until 2018. In talking, again, like I said earlier, in talking about David with his lovely wife, Susan, I came to learn why this dedication is so important for this community and Cherokee County. It's not for the accolades and the accomplishments, but for the relationships that David built. He was a husband, a father, a colleague, a mentor, a coach, a teacher, and a friend to so many. It was more than just music with David. It was about building a relationship and getting to know the whole person. And I think that truly defines why we do something like this for a man like David Harrison. Because it's more than just band. It's about his influence on all of you and countless others from our community. So I am honored to be here this evening to have been able to play a small part in this much deserving recognition. I thank you for being here this evening, and at this time I would like to welcome to the podium our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Brian Hightower.
So Susan, if Doe Kirkland was here, she'd say, let's get on with it, right? I also hear Elliot Berman. If you ever had a graduation with the second principal of the school, Elliot Berman, he would talk about at a graduation 15 minutes, and then he would look at everybody and say, and now for my formal remarks. So I'm just going to start with the formality on the front end. On behalf of the school board, it is my pleasure as your superintendent to declare this facility named after David E. Harrison. And as we look at that name on the building, it brings a sense of pride to me. I can tell you I'm just absolutely thrilled. Got to know David both as a peer teacher, but also as an administrator and superintendent, but also as a community member and as a father, and now I get to enjoy being a grandfather, and I think of David as well. What a superhuman he was. He truly was a rock star. He truly was an influencer. When I think about David, I shared with Susan at the school board meeting, I see him on that tower, okay, behind us, with his bullhorn and his big straw hat. I see him having them march and do it again, and do it again, and do it again. But I also see him with his arm around someone, cajoling them, bringing them along. I think of David as the type of a music director and orchestra leader that knew that it took a lot of work to get to the first seat, but an orchestra and a band's not made of people sitting on the first seat, right? It takes a band. It takes a unit. He, to me, was just an excellent example of an influencer. As a young person in the profession moving forward, you wanna learn from people. You want to learn from people that do it the right way. And so I looked at people like David Harrison. He believed in family, but he also knew that community was a bigger family that was important to build as well. He's a person who took his job very seriously, but to me, he didn't take himself too seriously. So as I was coming down the road, just thinking through the remarks I would want to make, I just started smiling. I'm sorry, David, but I'm smiling. He brought levity. He brought a smile to the people's face around him. You know, there's a great quote by Maya Angelou about the fact that people will never forget how you made them feel. And he would bring a smile to your face, wouldn't he? He just was such an encourager. I shared at the board meeting that I could see him in the straw hat and the bullhorn, but I could also see him all tucked up with chorale. I could see him tucked up leading that orchestra. I could see him at Reinhardt in a tux. But, you know, the last time I saw him in a tux, it was actually at our CCEF Foundation Gala. And I think there it kind of crystallized for me. I think that David Harrison was like a professional influencer in the way that he encouraged people. You would have acts come through, and David probably judged for us 2 or 3 different years. And some of the high school acts, they were better than others, but you know, he had such a way of picking the things that they had mastered that were difficult and just maybe mentioning the things that could make them better. He made everyone around him feel important, feel like they had a place in the room, whether they were a standout first chair, or maybe that student that was struggling, that person that was struggling to sit in the 4th seat. We owe a lot to David Harrison. Henry Adams once said that an educator never knows the end of its influence because it stretches into eternity. And I believe that. Mike McGowan and I were recently at an event and got to hear the Teacher of the Year for Georgia. And she said, you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed. And that's the kind of person we're talking about. And so to David and his family and to all the friends that are gathered here tonight, just know that the school board, the school district's very honored to stand with Bob tonight and declare this David's legacy. We appreciate you, and I look forward to tonight and hearing a little bit more about David. Thank you for coming tonight.
Okay, so yeah, I entered the stage the wrong way. Hopefully that's not a sign. My name is Kason Sams, and I am David's oldest child. When my mom and David first started talking about getting married, I was 12 and my brother Matt was 9. And we loved the Harrisons. We didn't love David's station wagon that he drove, but the Harrison family we just fell in love with right away. We would love to go visit them on their farm where they all grew up. And since he grew up on a farm, he knew the importance of hard work and going to church, and he also discovered his love of music. All of David's siblings are musical in one way or another. Either they sing or they play. So it kind of shows you that it was a musical family. Some people ask us where the E comes from, and David E. Harrison. He was named after his grandfather, Earl, who taught music groups at church and stuff for 50 years. David only had 2 requests of us as we became a new family. He wanted us to start going to church every Sunday, which was a little different, every Sunday, and that he wanted us all to try being in the band. I can't tell you how much I loved being in the band. I went kicking and screaming because I didn't think it was for me, but I loved it. Some of my best memories were made right here at this school, in this band room, in this parking lot, on the football field. So in 1990, when Sequoia first opened, at the time it was the plan that Mama and David and myself would all come here to Sequoia, and that Matt would go to Dean Rusk. And Jonathan was just a cute little toddler that David carried around on his shoulders. That was just precious for everybody to see. Both Mom and David interviewed with Doe Kirkland, who was the first principal here. And Mama, being the overachiever, she worked so hard. She worked under Doe Kirkland. She helped set up the faculty and student handbooks that Sequoia started with. So I guess she was feeling pretty good about it. And Miss Kirkland called my mom and told her that she was very impressed and that she knew she would be a great AP someday, because APs were a dime a dozen. But good band directors were hard to find. So she hired David and not Mama. Let's just say it was a little cool in the house that night as we discovered this. But then during pre-planning at the last minute, Mama was hired to be an AP at Cherokee High School. And eventually my brother Matt joined Mama. So on Friday nights, we were house divided. David and I wore our black and gold and came to Sequoia, whereas Mom and Matt went to Cherokee games. My brother Matt and David bonded a lot through his athletics and especially playing golf. Over the years, David bestowed a lot of his wisdom to Matt on the golf course, and a lot of phrases that were followed with, "Don't tell your mother I said that." Life was not exactly glorious our first year here at Sequoia High School. Our practice field was a cow pasture. So we didn't know which was worse, the smell or the flies, and there were fly traps everywhere that year. We didn't have band uniforms, but that's okay. David planned a very exciting show, which included shorts and Hawaiian shirts, because David loved a good Hawaiian shirt. But we loved it. He really, as people have mentioned already about him, being such a leader in his community, he kind of had a tough task at hand, because he was joining Cherokee High School and Etowah High School students together, and we were very much rivals at the time. So, but by the end of August, we were all very good friends. At Sequoia High School, band kids were not teased like your stereotypical band kids can sometimes be teased. David stressed our academics were as important as our marching skills. He wanted students to have good reputations and to be good people. He did not just want to teach us how to read music. He taught us many life lessons. The first year Mom and David were married, as a class lesson, Mama had students write a philosophy of life, and she shared her own philosophy of life. And so David liked the idea too, tweaked it a little bit, and then the seniors at the end of every year at the band banquet would get a copy of David's philosophy. And it was such a tradition that one year the students got very upset because David didn't cry as he was reading the philosophy in front of their class, because normally he was a very tearful man at those band banquets. But those are not the same as the Harryisms that have become so popular. Most of us can remember and hear David's voice when we think on time is late. And bigger is not better. Better is better. When you read the Harryisms, you knew exactly when you heard David say that. He definitely created a sense of family, of leaders, and of role models for our school. I always knew that I wanted to be a teacher. At first I thought it was because I wanted summers off. Nobody goes into teaching for summers off. You know, we go into teaching to make a difference. Over this past, sorry, let me make sure I didn't miss the page. Okay, over this past year, our family has been so moved and so surprised by how many Sequoia students and Sequoia families have reached out to us. David taught for so long that at the funerals and at the wakes, some people were coming up and going, "And who are you?" Because he did not know, some of them did not know David's older children. I started to realize that David was a super teacher as I became a teacher myself, and I couldn't believe how he organized all these trips to go to Disney World and Toronto and Washington, D.C. and New York and many, many other places. I got stressed out the first time I had to take 22 kindergartners to the art barn. But David's family, David's parents, instilled a love of travel in him, and he wanted students to have that opportunity as well. Another thing that he started was the Explorers Club, and he would take students canoeing for days on the Okefenokee Swamp. My mom said that's why she got a 12-month position, so she didn't have to go on those trips. Not only was David a good teacher and teaching us great musical abilities, he wanted to be a part of the data team for Sequoia because he was one of the original tech gurus and knew how to make spreadsheets and stuff. As a family, we are so close and we are so blessed. And as my brother and I started having children, our parents became affectionately known as Mama Sue and Papa Dave. They would pick their grandchildren up on Wednesday nights and take them to dinner at church, and everyone had to share, no matter how hard it was for some of them, what they learned that day, because some of them, it wasn't as forthcoming as they would like for it to be. When David passed, he had 8 grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren. Out of those grandchildren, 5 of them went through the Teasley and Cherokee bands, and 2 of them are still in the band right now, who are really missing their afternoon lessons with Papa Dave. Since David became an ordained minister, he also had the opportunity to marry several of his former students and his oldest granddaughter just 2 years ago. Many times we would go to Mama Sue's and Papa Dave's, whether it was the pool or their deck, and ask for advice, or David was always there just to listen. We have learned how to go on without him. Some weeks are easier than others. But sometimes you just hear that whistle and you immediately turn around and think that he's whistling at you again, or he's brought the band to attention for a piece of music. I just want to thank the school board, the superintendent, the principal, the band directors, and Sequoia High School students for this honor. He was a special man, and for sure his legacy will live on. Thank you.
So if that stays. Hi, I'm Jonathan Harrison. I'm the youngest son. I just start off with the same things. Thank you to the Cherokee County School Board, School District, and Sequoia for bestowing this honor on my dad. Mom was a high school administrator and worked many evenings, so I was in a unique position because I was a member of the Band of Chiefs for 10 years. I started marching in the 3rd grade. Very small. And I actually, there's some pictures of me in the band room of where he had me learn to march at like 6 years old, just so he could show high schoolers how easy it was to learn. Just to remind them when they would complain, like, oh, well, this 6-year-old can do it. But I grew up in this building. I eventually attended Dean Rusk in Sequoia, so it's strange to be back here because I did grow up here. I agonized what to talk about. Casey, my sister, kind of talked about the early years and some of his personal life. Steve Bell later is going to talk about some of the funny stories and leadership stories. And then you've got Rick James talking about some of the band things in the community. Dr. Van Alstyne already talked about, Dr. Hierter talked about things, so I wanted to share some different things. So I'm going to share some stuff from the classroom. The little moments that you've heard so many people already say it, just those little moments that made a difference in people's lives. He was a great educator and band director. He created this wonderful performance space after he outgrew the old band room, which I could tell you many stories about the old band room, but we're just going to skip those. And I can tell you how he planned out this space, what buildings he used for inspiration, and how he knew exactly how many sound dampening things he needed, and how he really took a passion for it. But that's not really everything. It's not about the practice rooms, the orchestra space, or the computer lab, which was supposed to be used for music theory, mostly used for Halo tournaments. Or I could tell you about the buildings he based it on, but really the most important thing is just how he created a self and welcoming space for his students every single day. He had a knack for knowing when students were troubled. I saw him call many students into his office when they seemed down or angry, upset, just to ask them what was going on. Even if no one else noticed, he always noticed when you were having a bad day. Since his passing, I've heard from many students who have told me stories about how he comforted them when their family was going through a tough time, when they struggled in school, or he coached them out of a bad situation, or into graduation. Many different things where he was more than just a director, educator, authority figure to many people. He was a friend, counselor, and confidant to thousands of teens who needed someone to listen, and he did that for 34 years. He made this building a safe place where even non-band kids would congregate before and after the school day, away from the chaos of high school life. Speaking of chaos, he also had a nose for when students were getting into trouble. I can tell you there are a few missing Harryisms from the back of the program or the t-shirt yelled at students when we got out of hand. One of my favorite stories is when he caught me in the ceiling. I spent every lunch in the utility room completing homework or goofing off with my group of friends who were also in band. One spring, we had too much time on our hands, and one of us, they shall remain nameless, found out we could sneak into the ceiling and move around up there or hide. We were, of course, caught. The day we got caught was because our voices echoed into the main room, and we kept disturbing freshman band. Dad stormed in the utility room, just furious, heard us, but he couldn't see us. So he cautiously asked where we were hiding, and then he noticed somebody's foot dangling from a missing ceiling tile. The exact wording escapes me, but let's just say what he yelled was colorful, and the freshman looked appropriately terrified when we walked out. Yeah, they were terrified. So he figured out a way to prevent us from being bored, which he always had a way. If anybody can tell you, like, oh, I'm not doing a lot of stuff. Oh, great, here's something to practice, here's something to do. He said if we wanted to stay during lunch, then we had to play in freshman band. But we were all seniors and first chairs, so it wouldn't be fair to let us play our own instruments. He didn't think it'd be appropriate. So all 5 of us had to learn new instruments to keep things fair in less than a month before festival. Every single one of us had to learn something new. We stayed very busy and out of the field. On fairness, that was something that was very big for him. I have just a couple stories. One was when I tried out for drum major. He told me not to, and I trusted him and did not plan on it. There are plenty of other leadership positions I could try out for, but a group of band moms, one of which is here, were furious when they heard that. They said he was going so far to appear fair, he was actually being unfair to me. So he thought they had a good point, but he's still worried about the appearance of impropriety. So he went out of his way to make sure everything was fair. So it was the only year in Sequoia history, to my knowledge, where a drum major candidate had to show teacher recommendations, grades, personal statements to the leadership classes, including speeches, votes from the leadership class on each candidate, and you had to conduct in front of a group of judges, of which he was not one of them. He did all of that just so he had this whole setup, and technically he had nothing to do with any of the drum major choices that year, which as a band director is very strange. But it's because he didn't want anybody to think that I was getting special treatment, or anyone was getting special treatment, or even it looked like we did. Second story involves hard and fast rules about marching shoes. I forgot my band shoes when I was in the 6th grade, because I was 12. The rule for everyone is if you did not have your marching shoes, you had to have solid color socks that matched the pants, and then you would go out and march in the socks. The day I forgot happened to be November, and it rained, and I still marched in socks. It was so cold. No special treatment, as my freezing feet could attest. Those stories and many others make me proud to be a part of this program, to have my dad as my teacher, mentor, and friend. After attending his beloved UGA, where I marched Redcoats, I actually went to law school and I moved out to the West Coast. 2 years ago, I was frustrated and decided to leave the corporate world and just try to come back. So I ended up calling a bunch of family members who were teachers just to say, what do you love about teaching? I got a number of different answers from my sister, who's a teacher, my mom, who was a teacher, still is. I have aunts and uncles who are teachers. It's kind of a family profession. But when I asked Dad, he had a different response. He said, because the moment you see you are making a difference in a kid's life is special, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. He was right. I love being a teacher now. I teach down the street. Creating that safe place for students and to spend the last year back home with him, watching Georgia football, canoeing, cooking out, those were the things that are super important. The outpouring of love when he passed from everyone, our church, his former students, colleagues, has taught me that being a good teacher goes a very long way. You've heard all the euphemisms, but it really is true. It means a lot. So thank you, and I'm really glad that we got to do this.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rick James, and I'm truly honored to be here tonight. I would like to thank Dr. Susan Paget Harrison for asking me to speak. Excuse me. I too would like to recognize and thank the Cherokee County School Board members, Dr. Hightower, Principal Van Alstyne, and current band director Casey Eubanks. My wife Karen and I were thrilled to have all 3 of our children. Lee played trumpet, Aaron did color guard, and Adam was on the drum line. We were thrilled that they went through Sequoia and participated in the band. Karen even said recently that our kids wouldn't be who they are today had it not been for the influences of David Harrison. My first meeting with David goes back to 2001 when I brought my oldest son Lee to curriculum night in the spring. Back then we went to the school and the rising freshmen chose their electives for the next school year. Now on the way to the school, Lee told me very emphatically, he said, "Dad, I'm not doing band."
I said, let's just see what they have to offer. So the very first person we meet is David Harrison. Lee talked to him briefly, but said he did not want to do band, and that is when David hit Lee with what I thought was the best advice anyone could have given. He said, Lee, I would love to have you in the band, but if you don't do it, please find something else to get involved with. That was great advice that I would not have thought to give, and of course, at the end of the night, Lee chose band after all. I was immediately impressed with David and decided to become involved with the booster program. That lasted 10 straight years, and this is where our friendship was cultivated. I quickly began to understand his philosophy for the students. It was so much more than music. David taught life lessons through all parts of the music and performance arena. Probably the first Harryism, as Casey mentioned, that was introduced to everyone was on time is late. What a great way to prepare for life in general. And I'll bet you that every student, booster member, or anybody that ever worked with Mr. H remembers that quote. He even used his passion for teaching life lessons when he chose the trips the band would take. He wanted to make sure that the students had a chance to get out of Cherokee County and see other parts of the country, the history of each city and or state, the ethical differences, the landscape, the architecture, the food, and the cultures. Again, so much more than just music. One perfect example of this was our trip to New Orleans. We had a Mardi Gras competition show that year, and it was perfect for that trip as the band racked up first place awards constantly. In between competitions and marching at the national championship game at the Superdome, we got to see a Dixieland jazz band. We toured a bayou at night, and some even held alligators. I think Mr. Jonathan did. I will say that I was really glad to get home and eat something besides jambalaya and get some rest, because that trip wore me out. But it was great. David Harrison wanted to give all students that were willing to try the opportunity to be included in the music program, both marching band and concert band. I say this specifically because David included all. My youngest son, Adam, has autism. He participated in the special education program here at Sequoia, and while that experience was very good, it could not compare to the music experience. David had many special needs students participating in the program, and he never mentioned it. And I never knew it until Adam got involved. One of my favorite stories is about our drum major at the time, Allie Christian. At a competition in Haralson County, Allie asked her mother, "What does Mr. Harrison tell the judges about the special needs kids that we have marching?" And her mother said, "Nothing." And then we have the band room. If only those walls could talk. The band room became home for all of the students. They usually went in first in the morning and out in the evening through the band room doors and not the school entrances. The band room was their safe place.